At 78 years old, I thought I had made the smartest decision of my life. After my husband passed away and my children kept worrying about me living alone, moving into Sunset Manor seemed like the perfect solution. The brochure showed smiling faces, organized activities, and promises of a vibrant community where I could age gracefully while staying safe and secure. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my small room, staring out at a parking lot instead of the garden I tended for 40 years, wondering how I got it so wrong. My name is Dorothy, and I want to share my story because I wish someone had told me these truths before I made this life-changing decision. This isn't about bashing nursing homes or the dedicated staff who work in them. It's about the realities that no one talks about, the emotional wisdom I've gained through this experience that I hope can guide others facing similar crossroads in their life after 60. When my daughter suggested I tour a few facilities, I thought it made sense. I was tired of my children's constant worry calls, checking if I remembered to take my medication or if I had fallen. The idea of having help nearby and not being a burden seemed appealing. Senior empowerment, I told myself, meant making practical choices about my future. But here's what I discovered. There's a world of difference between choosing to move somewhere and feeling like you have to. The decision felt right at first. Sunset Manor had beautiful common areas, a library, and they promised home-cooked meals. During the tour, I met residents who seemed content, playing cards and chatting in the sunroom. The staff was friendly, and my room would have its own bathroom and space for some of my furniture. It felt like a new chapter rather than an ending. What I didn't realize then was how much I would miss the small freedoms I'd taken for granted. The ability to wake up whenever I wanted, to eat dinner at 8 o'clock if I felt like it, or to spend an entire afternoon in my garden without anyone checking on me. These weren't just conveniences, they were pieces of my identity that I didn't even realize I was giving up. The hardest part wasn't the loss of independence, though that stung. It was the slow realization that I had made this choice out of fear rather than genuine need. My family's anxiety had become my anxiety, and in trying to ease their worries, I had created a situation that left me feeling more isolated than I ever felt in my own home. Independent living doesn't just mean having your own space. It means having control over your daily choices, your routines, and your sense of self. I learned this lesson the hard way, and I'm not alone. Many of my fellow residents share similar stories of decisions made too quickly, without fully understanding what we were trading away. The 6 truths I'm about to share aren't meant to scare you away from making necessary care decisions. They're meant to help you ask the right questions and make choices that truly serve your best interests, not just everyone else's peace of mind. But first, I need to tell you about the morning I realized I had made a terrible mistake, and why it took me 3 more months to finally do something about it. That morning started like any other at Sunset Manor. The breakfast bell rang at 7:30 sharp, just like it had every day for the past 6 months. I sat at my assigned table with 3 other residents, picking at scrambled eggs that tasted like they came from a box. The conversation was the same as always: complaints about medications, updates on grandchildren's visits, and speculation about which resident would be the next to take a turn. I found myself staring out the dining room window at the small courtyard, watching a maintenance worker trim the hedges into perfect geometric shapes. Everything here was orderly, predictable, safe. It should have been comforting, but instead, it felt suffocating. Before my life, after retirement, led me here, I had been a high school English teacher for 37 years. My days were filled with teenage energy, lesson planning, and a constant challenge of finding new ways to make Shakespeare relevant to 16-year-olds. After Harold passed away 2 years ago, I thought I was ready for quiet. I thought I wanted predictability. What I didn't anticipate was how much purpose I would lose along with the chaos. Harold and I had planned our golden years differently. We talked about traveling to places we'd only read about, maybe volunteering at the literacy center, or finally taking that pottery class I'd always wanted to try. When cancer took him just 8 months after his diagnosis, those dreams felt too big for one person to carry alone. My children, bless their hearts, stepped in immediately. Phone calls every morning, grocery runs, offers to help with yard work. Their concern came from love, but it also came with an underlying message. you're not capable anymore. You're fragile. You need protection. Seeing your reflection teaches you that sometimes the people who love you most can accidentally diminish your sense of self without meaning to. My daughter would arrive at my house and immediately start reorganizing my medicine cabinet or questioning whether I was eating enough. My son installed security cameras just for peace of mind and called if he noticed I hadn't moved around much during the day. I began to see myself through their worried eyes. Maybe I was becoming a burden. Maybe I wasn't as sharp as I used to be. Maybe living alone really was dangerous at my age. The irony is that I had never felt more mentally clear or emotionally resilient in my life. Grief had taught me things about myself I never knew. I discovered I could fix a leaky faucet by watching YouTube videos. I learned to cook for one without feeling sorry for myself. I found comfort in my own company in ways I never had when Harold was alive. But grief also made me doubt my own judgment. When your partner of 52 years is suddenly gone, you question everything, including your ability to make good decisions about your own future. That doubt made me vulnerable to other people's fears about my well-being. Finding purpose after such a significant loss isn't just about staying busy. It's about rediscovering who you are when all your familiar roles change. I wasn't just Harold's wife anymore, or an active teacher shaping young minds. I was simply Dorothy, and I wasn't sure what that meant. So when my family presented the nursing home option as a solution to everyone's concerns, I agreed. Not because I needed it, but because I thought it would prove I was being responsible and realistic about aging. I thought it would give my children peace of mind and give me a fresh start. What I didn't realize was that I was trading my authentic self for everyone else's version of safety. The breaking point came during what should have been a celebration. My granddaughter Sarah had just gotten engaged, and the family gathered in the common room at Sunset Manor for what they called a little party. My daughter brought a store-bought cake and some balloons, trying her best to make the sterile space feel festive. But as I watched my family awkwardly perched on the institutional furniture, making small talk with curious residents who had wandered over, I felt something crack inside me. Sarah, barely 25 and glowing with excitement about her future, kept glancing around the room with barely concealed sadness. When she hugged me goodbye, she whispered, "Grandma, are you really happy here?" The question hit me like a physical blow because I realized I had been lying to everyone, including myself, for months. That night, I lay in my narrow bed listening to my roommate's breathing machine and thinking about late life choices. How had I let other people's fears dictate the most important decision of my remaining years? I thought about all the times I had counseled my students about peer pressure, telling them to trust their own instincts even when everyone else seemed to know better. Yet here I was at 78, having ignored my own advice. The next morning, I called my daughter and told her I wanted to move back home. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice was tight with panic. "Mom, we've been through this. You can't live alone anymore. What if you fall? What if you forget to take your medication? What if something happens and no one finds you for days?" Her fears weren't irrational. These are real concerns that come with aging, and I understood her love was driving every worry. But I also understood something she didn't. Aging with dignity doesn't mean eliminating every possible risk from your life. It means making informed choices about which risks you're willing to take to preserve what matters most to you. The family dynamics that followed were the most challenging I had faced since Harold's death. My son sided with his sister, presenting me with statistics about falls and medical emergencies in elderly people living alone. They scheduled a family meeting with a nursing home social worker, who gently explained that adjustment issues were normal and that many residents went through a phase of wanting to return to their previous living situations. I sat there listening to them discuss my life as if I weren't in the room, and I realized this was about more than just where I lived. This was about whether I still had the right to make my own decisions, even if those decisions carried risks that made my family uncomfortable. It was about whether my desire for independence was worth their sleepless nights and constant worry. The social worker suggested a compromise. Perhaps I could try supervised independent living in a senior apartment complex. My children seized on this idea immediately, researching facilities that would provide the safety net they craved while giving me more freedom than the nursing home allowed. On paper, it seemed perfect, but something in me rebelled against the idea of another institutional solution to what felt like a problem that existed more in their minds than in my reality. I had spent months in this place, and while I had made some friends and the staff was kind, I knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't where I belonged. The question was whether I had the courage to fight for what I needed, even if it meant potentially damaging my relationships with the people I loved most. The answer came from the most unexpected source. While my family debated my future in hushed phone conversations and worried text message chains, I received a letter that changed everything. The return address made my heart skip. It was from the Riverside Community Center, where I had volunteered briefly after Harold's death before my children's concerns convinced me to scale back my activities. Inside was a handwritten note from Patricia, the center's director. She had heard through mutual friends that I was living at Sunset Manor, but she was writing because they desperately needed someone with my experience. The center had received a grant to start an adult literacy program, and they remembered how effective I had been during my short time there. Would I consider coming back to help design and teach the program, even if it was just part-time? Reading that letter, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, the spark of being truly needed for my skills, not my safety. This wasn't about managing my decline or keeping me occupied. This was about rediscovery after 60, about using decades of teaching experience to help adults who had fallen through the cracks of the education system learn to read. I tucked the letter away and said nothing to my family during their next visit, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, I called Patricia from the phone in the common room, long after the other residents had gone to bed. Her voice was warm and enthusiastic as she described the program. 23 adults had already signed up, people who had hidden their illiteracy for years, finally ready to take the step toward learning. "Dorothy," she said, "I know you're in a difficult situation, but these people need someone who understands that learning has no age limit. You have a gift for making people feel safe enough to be vulnerable, and that's exactly what this program needs." As I hung up the phone, I realized this opportunity represented everything my current situation lacked: purpose, respect for my abilities, and the chance to make a real difference. But also presented an impossible choice. The program would require me to be available 3 days a week, to drive to different locations around the city, and to work irregular hours depending on my student schedules. Everything my family feared about my independence would be magnified by this commitment. The next morning, I made a decision that surprised even me. Instead of calling my children first, I called Patricia back and accepted the position. Then I asked the nursing home's social worker about their policies for residents who wanted to work outside the facility. Her surprised expression told me everything I needed to know. I would be the first person to ask. When my daughter arrived for her weekly visit and I told her about the job offer, her face went through a series of emotions I had never seen before. Shock, fear, anger, and then something that looked almost like recognition. For the first time in months, she was seeing me not as someone who needed protection, but as someone who still had something valuable to give to the world. But her next words shattered any hope I had that this might lead to healing family bonds and new beginnings for all of us. "Mom, you can't be serious. You're 78 years old. What if you have a medical emergency while you're driving to some stranger's house? What if you get confused and can't find your way home? We moved you here to keep you safe, and now you want to throw that all away for some volunteer job." Her voice cracked on the last words, and suddenly I saw something I had missed for months. My daughter wasn't just worried about my safety. She was terrified of losing me the way she had lost her father. All this time, I had thought her overprotectiveness was about control, but it was actually about grief she had never fully processed. "Sarah," I said, using her childhood nickname for the first time since Harold's funeral, "sit down. We need to talk about your dad." She looked startled, but she sat. For the next hour, we talked about things we had both been avoiding. How helpless she felt watching Harold deteriorate so quickly. How guilty she felt for not visiting more in his final weeks because the hospital scared her. How she had convinced herself that if she could just keep me safe enough, she wouldn't have to face another sudden loss. This was our life's turning point after 60, Not just mine, but hers too. She was learning that protecting someone you love sometimes means letting them live fully, even when that living involves risk. I was learning that my children's fears weren't obstacles to overcome, but love that needed to be honored and understood. The wisdom with age isn't just about knowing yourself better. It's about seeing the people around you more clearly. My daughter's controlling behavior wasn't about doubting my abilities. It was about her own unhealed wounds from watching her father slip away despite all our efforts to save him. I'm not Dad, I told her gently. And even if something happens to me, hiding me away won't change the fact that life is uncertain. But right now, I'm healthy, I'm sharp, and I have something meaningful to contribute. Don't you think Dad would want me to use whatever time I've left doing something that matters? The tears came then for both of us. Real tears about real fears, not the polite conversations we had been having for months. She admitted she had been having nightmares about getting a call that something had happened to me. I admitted that I had been so focused on proving my independence that I hadn't considered how my choices affected her emotional well-being. The breakthrough came when she asked, "What if we compromised differently? What if you move back home, take the job, but let us help set up some safety measures that actually make sense? Not because we don't trust you, but because we love you and want to support what you're doing." For the first time in months, a solution emerged that honored both my need for autonomy and their need to feel involved in keeping me safe. Real emotional closure doesn't mean everyone gets exactly what they want. It means everyone feels heard and valued in the decision-making process. 2 weeks later, I moved back into my own house with a medical alert system that actually gave me confidence rather than making me feel fragile. My son installed better lighting and grab bars, not as symbols of my limitation, but as tools that would help me continue living independently. And on my first day teaching at the Literacy Center, both my children were there, not to monitor me, but to celebrate this new chapter one was brave enough to write. 6 months have passed since I left Sunset Manor, and I want you to know that the lessons I learned there weren't wasted. Those months taught me something crucial about senior resilience. It's not about proving you don't need help. It's about choosing the kind of help that enhances your life rather than diminishing it. The difference between support and control is often just a conversation away, but someone has to be brave enough to start it. My literacy students have become one of life's quiet victories I never expected. There's Maria, a 67-year-old grandmother who hid her inability to read for 50 years and is now working through her first novel. There's Robert, a retired mechanic who can rebuild an engine but couldn't read the instructions, now helping his grandson with homework. Watching them discover that learning doesn't end at any particular age has reminded me that growth and purpose don't have expiration dates. The timeless lessons from this experience go beyond my own story. I've learned that the conversations we avoid having with our families are often the most important ones. My daughter and I now talk regularly about her fears and my needs, creating space for both to exist without one canceling out the other. She started therapy to work through her grief about her father, and I've become more mindful about how my choices affect the people who love me. The 6 hard truths I promise to share aren't just about nursing homes. They're about the assumptions we make when life presents us with difficult choices. We assume that safety always trumps independence. We assume that family concerns should override personal desires. We assume that aging means accepting whatever arrangements others think are best for us. We assume that love and control are the same thing. We assume that taking risks at our age is selfish. And we assume that once we make a major life decision, we're stuck with it forever. Every one of these assumptions can be challenged if you're willing to have honest conversations about what really matters. The nursing home wasn't wrong for me because it was a bad place. It was wrong because it was a solution to the wrong problem. My family wasn't wrong to worry. They were responding to their love and fear in the only way they knew how. What changed everything was recognizing that growing older doesn't mean growing smaller. It doesn't mean accepting less joy, less purpose, or less say in your own life. Sometimes it means the opposite. It means finally having the courage to ask for what you really need, even when that's harder for everyone involved. If you're facing similar decisions about your future or watching someone you love navigate these choices, Remember that the goal isn't to eliminate all risk or discomfort. The goal is to create a life that feels authentic and meaningful, whatever your age. That's the real secret to aging with grace. Not avoiding all the hard conversations, but finally being brave enough to have them.